All right, in this section we will go over what does the typical interview process look like, and at each stage, what are the people that you are interviewing with going to be looking for? So first off, as we talked about previously, start with Glassdoor. Get a feel for what questions, what the interview process, a lot of that you can gain an understanding directly from Glassdoor based on other people's experiences. From that, you can understand who you're going to be interviewing with. And ultimately, as I mentioned, you don't necessarily want to immediately ask about benefits. For the most part, you can get a basic understanding from Glassdoor. However, once you have gone over Glassdoor and you kind of know, you can use what we're about to go over as a typical interview process. So starting out, recruiter phone screen. Typically, whether it's a recruiter reaching out to you out of the blue, or in the more likely casing, as you're just starting to get into this field, you've submitted an application, added your resume, and pinged them on LinkedIn. Typically, the first step will be a recruiter phone screen. This is going to be a very casual back and forth, likely won't even feel like a more rigid interview. It's going to be a casual conversation where they ask you stuff like, tell me about, a level deeper than what's on your resume, or how did you hear about us, or that kind of high level conversation. Now, it's important to remember recruiters / part of the talent team are part of HR. And what that means is HR tends to be very big on company culture. So they are in part going to try to get a feel for not only any kind of qualifications that the the sales or BDR manager have, but they're also going to try to get a feel for, are you going to be a good cultural fit for the company? So it's best to connect with them on more of an emotional level. Yes, and answer their questions, but also ask them questions like, why did you start at this company, and does that reason still stand true? Ask them how they would describe company culture and how it compares to previous companies. And yes, this is relative. You can get some of that on Glassdoor, but again, if they're in HR, that tends to be something they're passionate about, want to talk about, and thereby you're creating organic conversation about a topic that they care about, and they'll like you more. With this, as well as every other interview, mirror their level of enthusiasm. So typically, recruiters will be typically high energy. So take it up a notch. The recruiter, once they put you through to the next step, allow them to become your best friend. Look at it this way. The recruiter's job description is to find good candidates who can then can fill that role that they are going through the interview process for, which means as soon as they give you their thumbs up, or they give their boss the thumbs up for you, if you botch the next interviews, they're not going to look all that great, which also means that once they give you the thumbs up that you're moving on to the next step, ask them, hey, is there anything in particular you'd recommend I plan ahead for with the upcoming interview beyond just the typical, that sort of thing. Typically after a recruiter phone screen, there will oftentimes be some sort of assessment. This can look a couple of different ways, whether it's the two most common that I've seen is either a hire view, which is a company. Basically, it is think of it as a Zoom call where you're on video recording. They flash up a question and you have about 10 seconds to think of an answer. And this whole time you're being recorded and there's not another person on the other side of the phone. And you answer the question. You go through that for about, say, 10 questions. Each one you have, say, 3 minutes to answer, and that's a higher view assessment. The other kind of assessment, honestly, the more common one is, to call it what it is, it's an IQ test. I believe several years ago they determined that it was illegal to use IQ tests to determine or as part of the interview process because it was discriminatory. So they called it assessments, personality assessments, whatever you want to call it. They're basically all IQ tests. So just calling it what it is so you can prep accordingly. Nothing you can really do to plan there other than make sure you have a strong internet connection. You set aside as much time as it says that you'll need, and make sure that you have pen and paper with you so that you can take notes, because it's going to be just like pretty much any other IQ assessment that you've taken. Assuming you pass that, typically the next interview will either be with an HR manager, who will be the recruiter's boss, in which just rinse and repeat that, or it will be with a sales or BDR manager. Now, one trick that works just as well for software sales interviews as it does for any other interview: values. People have values, companies have values. If you go onto pretty much any company's career page or somewhere else on their website, you will see a few values that they state. As you go through the interview process, find a way to work those values in. If they say that one of their core values is teamwork, then be prepared with a story of when you worked as a team to accomplish some awesome goal. And then also find a way of working in that you're really looking for a job that values, at a company that values teamwork. You get where I'm going with that. So there's a lot that you can learn just from the website. However, there's also a lot that you can learn during each step of the interview process. If, for example, you were to hear one of these values about, we value transparent communication, and you hear that from the initial recruiter, you can take that value and in the next interview or interviews, you can state that as something that is important to you. Now, do not lie. That is not what I am saying. If it's not a value for you, just leave it out. However, if it is even a little bit of a value, that is a great way to bump up multiple notches on their perspective of you as you go through the interview process, because it conveys that you are aligned culturally and potentially that you do your homework. Okay, so sales and BDR manager interview. So they will often go back to, are you a good fit for the company and do you have a growth mindset? They will not expect you, unless it says, even if their job description says college degree required, assuming you haven't lied about it, which by the way, don't lie about having one if you don't, you're there. You're interviewing, own your background. You're there for a reason. What they are trying to get a feel for is not your past, but rather more so, do you have a coachable, growth-oriented mindset that can help you be able to grow into an effective sales rep? They want to know that you are driven and that when you fall down, you will get back up. They want to know that you are approachable. They want to, even if you have no experience, you should own it and focus on your hunger and, again, that growth mindset. And even if you have no experience, that will still be music to their ears. Mention ways in which you are going above and beyond in preparation for these interviews, including that you've read these sales books, including that you have a sales mentor. All of these things are going to make you, again, stand out over every single person who simply submitted a resume on a job aggregator site and those who applied on the company website. Okay, so what are some questions that are worth asking to the BDR and sales manager? Now, keep in mind, this may be the person that you end up reporting to. And so this is where you ask, for example, what percent of reps are hitting quota? What is the typical path to promotion and how long does that typically take? What are the average reps earning and what are the top reps earning? What is the top reason that reps are leaving your company? And by the way, every company has areas that they see as a vulnerability, but it's still just a good thing to ask them, get their own kind of perspective on, because it also shows that you're being deliberate and intentional. Again, there are two types of questions. One is questions that you're asking because you want to know the answer to. The second kind of question is questions that you want to ask because you want them to think about something. So that's an example of, you're probably going to get a canned answer, but it is a great question for having them kind of take a step back and think about how you're thinking about them. You're being scrutinous. You're not just eager to take the first job that is presented to you. Okay. What kind of product and sales training do you offer, and are these ongoing? Ask about average deal size. This gets you a feel for what level of solutions they are providing. So if it's, for example, average deal size is $5,000 company-wide, you have significantly less growth potential within the company than if their average deal size is, say, $50,000. Ask what the typical sales process looks like and how long it takes. How many meetings does that take? And if you don't get through all of your questions, you can ask them in a follow-up interview, and you can even position that as almost a bridge to the next interview. Let's say you have a 30-minute interview scheduled with a BDR manager and you run up on time and you still have outstanding questions. What I would do in that situation, what I have done, is tell them, hey, I know you have a meeting coming up and I really appreciate your time. Who should I talk to about these additional questions, or does it make sense for me to just ask them in the next interview? In sales, that's referred to as an assumptive close, where you're assuming that you are going to be moved on to the next phase. Okay. And additionally, like we talked about before, if previous interviewers answer a question, you can rattle them off and ask if you heard them right by way of verifying. Don't do that in a way as though you're doubting them, but it is worth, because again, sometimes companies lie, sometimes people lie, people are flawed. It is worth double checking the most important things. For example, what percent of reps are hitting quota? There was one company I was applying for that the recruiter said 100% of reps are hitting quota. When I dug in, the head of sales said, no, it's 50%. So again, there's nothing wrong with double checking. It's just you're doing your due diligence. This is you putting yourself in a position where you are not desperate, where they are becoming more desperate for you than you are for them to give you a job. Once you are partway through the interview process, and if it is at a company that you can really see yourself working for, I highly recommend you reach out to those people on LinkedIn. Not all of them. Think one or two people who are in the position you're applying for, so say a BDR, and one person who is a level above in the role that you'd be applying or that you'd be promoting into. For example, an account executive role. Ask them for 15 minutes, or if it's a local company, ask to take them out to coffee. Have an agenda, share questions with them in advance out of respect for them so that they can prepare ahead of time. But ask questions about, for example, candidly, how is it to work at this company? How is it working for this manager? I have been told that X amount of percent of reps are hitting quota. Have you found that to be true? what does the typical promotion path look like? And in this case, you're getting candid feedback from people who have no incentivization to lie to you. Very, very important. Additionally, I would ask during the interview process, like, what are the traits that successful BDRs have in common? And to the account executive, what traits do the BDRs that you enjoy working with have in common? Sales really is, especially as you get into the upper echelons of sales like enterprise, it very much is a team sport, and it's vital to build relationships with others in your organization. Okay, so we talked about initial phone screen, assessment, BDR/BDR, sales/BDR manager interview. Typically after that, there will be a mock cold call and or interview. I'll provide a template for example, what I think is a really good cold email that you can utilize. They might give you specific criteria you can modify it for. With a cold call or a cold voicemail, keep it, well, for a cold voicemail, you should never, ever leave a voicemail that is longer than 1 minute. Start with your name and your company, end with your name and your company. In between, fill it with what is going to be of value to the person you're leaving the voicemail for. Do not try to pitch a product. Tell them, this is a challenge we're seeing in your industry. This is the kind of outcome that such and such company, one of our customers, has seen from using our solution. Does it make sense for us to talk? Okay. And then with a cold call, it's going to be more question based. So asking them, basically you're doing a mini discovery. Asking them questions about their current processes and helping them get a general understanding of why you're calling and how you might be able to help them. Assuming you make it through that step, typically the next step is going to be with some member of senior leadership. In some cases, that's like a director or a C-suite, member of C-suite, and they're primarily going to be looking again at cultural fit and a little bit of, do you have the growth mindset to help you really promote within the organization. Once you make it through that stage, typically they will have you retake the assessment. They'll have you do a background check. And by the way, from the retaking the assessment, they're basically trying to make sure that the results are pretty accurate or consistent with each other. Otherwise, it could come across as though you're cheating. That being said, if you're not cheating, you don't need to worry about it. Okay. Background check, they might ask you for references, maybe not. And then typically they will, or you can ask, but they'll also let you know that when it's the last step of the interview process. At that point, you're just waiting for the offer letter. Typically, the recruiter that you first interviewed with will call you before they send the offer letter. They will float the offer by you, get a feel for what you think, if that's agreeable. That really is your one of your primary opportunities to negotiate. If you're good with it, great. If you're not good with it, let them know during that conversation, and that recruiter will go back to the sales leadership team and see what they can do. But just so you know, they do typically call before they email you the PDF of the offer letter. Now, to that point, and a little insider knowledge here, typically offer letters have deadlines. Typically, if you receive an offer letter, they'll say, hey, here's your offer letter. You have 7 days to respond. We really hope you come to work here. Most companies will likely extend it. However, they tend to be a little bit bully like that. That's why I strongly recommend applying to multiple companies at the same time. That way you have a better feel for what companies are out there, what companies really stand out to you, and you can slow walk interviews if needed. So think of it this way. Let's say you have a top 5 set of companies that you're interviewing with. You're in the middle of it. Well, what happens if the company that you're second most excited about gives you a 7-day window to respond to their offer letter, and the company that you're most excited about, you still have 2 interviews left with? It puts you in an awkward situation. Not to say you can't get out of it. That's a topic that we can cover at another time. However, it is easier just to try to align them as much as possible. Recruiters will typically try to rush you through the process. This is where, again, you own the process. So what my recommendation would be in that situation where there's one in particular that really stands out to you that you want to make sure you get to the end of that interview process with, would be so find out what the interview process looks like, find out ahead of time what the final interview is, and before that interview, slow walk it. Let them know, hey, I'm really excited about continuing the interview process with you. Honestly, I'm crazy busy the next 2 weeks and want to make sure that I'm giving my full attention to preparing, as well as at the actual interview with so-and-so during the final interview. Here's my availability 2 weeks out. Thank you for your understanding. You've made it that far, they're most likely not going to think of that in any negative light. If anything, you're putting yourself in more high demand. But that way, you also have time to finish up the interview process with the company that you're most excited about and can compare the offers apples to apples. Okay. Hopefully this has been helpful. From here, we will go into the actual interview process